Hi, my name is Max Lowen, and I am trained in psychology. I'm a trauma therapist. In my past, I've worked in jails and prisons, rape crisis centers with sexually abused kids, with homeless and addicted persons in the inner city, and things like that. In the most recent years, I have a show called Unbroken.global where I interview survivors of ritual abuse and sexual abuse and torture and things like that. And I also interview what I call truth warriors, so people that expose kind of what's going on out there in the world, and also healers. So my main goal with my show is to help people to do their inner work, to heal themselves, to integrate themselves, and then to learn what's going on out there so that all of us can rise to our fullest potential. And then I always see it as each one of us that heals ourselves like a light bulb that turns on the world. And so that increases the light and consciousness. So that's kind of the goal of the work that I do currently. So as a child, my father was a diplomat. So I was born in the United States, but I grew up in 5 different countries. So every 2 or 3 years, we moved to a different country. And I did my high school years in Italy and Rome. My mother is Italian, and her much older brother, my uncle, ran a secret underground facility in the outskirts of Rome. And pretty much after birth, I was targeted by him and put through what is called satanic ritual abuse and torture and trafficking. And when I say torture, I mean things like electric shock, beatings, rapes, buried alive with dead bodies, waterboarding, having to watch humans and animals be tortured and killed, being put in cages for long periods of time, and things like that. Also, my uncle's facility was connected to the underground, the sub levels of the Vatican. So I would be taken there a lot, and there I witnessed child sacrifice, unfortunately. Babies and small children brought in, they had a huge marble altar, and they would torture them and then cut them open and collect the blood and drink it. And these rituals, they are satanic, so they would be for Lucifer and to invite demonic entities into them. So I've seen those entities. And then I was trafficked to different VIPs and elites. So I think that's just a little background to describe, because I died several times because of these abuses. And so that's the very first experience where I died. I was maybe a few months old after birth. So I was abused to the point that I died as an infant. And I remember the feeling of leaving my body. It was so joyous and expansive. It felt like I was out of a prison. And I was suddenly everywhere, and Jesus was there. So that is the being that always greeted me when I left my body. And he comforted me. And when I was out of my body, I didn't have, a baby mind. I had a different, just my soul self. And so I was shown a holographic reality, and I would say I was shown the future, but in that space, there is no past or future. It's all just hard to explain, but it's one thing. Time is not really linear. So I could see why I had decided to come. And I could see a memory of myself in a meeting. It was some kind of galactic meeting. So there were other beings, not just humans, but different species. And the conversation was about planet Earth, and it was in trouble. And I could see a percentage. So I can't remember how other planets are, but I was shown that Earth was a place where you have duality. You have light and dark. and it was supposed to be balanced out. And then I was shown that when people come into the earth plane and incarnate, they also have to agree to a memory wipe. So when you come in, you don't remember who you are or any of your other lifetimes. And I was shown that the balance between light and dark was very tilted towards dark. It was like 75 or 80% dark. And so in that meeting, I volunteered to incarnate here, and so did others in the meeting, to come to try and address that imbalance. And so I decided to come back. And so I squeezed back into that little tiny baby body. And it was so uncomfortable to come back into the body. It felt very tight and very dark and dense. And anyway, so that was the first time that I died. And I came basically then chose to come back. Every time later, as I was different ages and I would be tortured and things like that, I would sometimes die. And so I would always see Jesus. In that dimension, there's form, but it's not physical, but there's still form. So he looked, human. And we would sit in this space that was just all light, if you will. There was almost like a chair that was made of light. So I would sit there and talk to him. And I would remember, because every time I went, it became sort of familiar to me. So I was just out of my body and in this space and place. And I would always be given a choice to return. I didn't have to, but I could see that a bunch of us came here. The vision was like a bunch of stars that fell down to the earth. And Jesus told me that I would have the strength, that I would survive. And so that in the future, when I grew up, I would find these other stars, these other lights, other souls that had incarnated here, and that we would help with restoring that balance. And because the planet was headed basically towards annihilation, it had become too dark. So I did remember that when I was back. Sometimes I was angry at myself for deciding to come back because the reality I was in was so horrific. But every time I left, I chose to come back. I don't remember how many times I died, but I'm going to say, I don't know, 10-ish. I can't really tell you a number. But what that did is I recognized very, very clearly that who I am, who we are, is our soul. And so when I would leave my body, there was not even a second where I wasn't me. So it's just the soul would come back and animate the body, and then I would be in the body, or I would be not in the body. And so it really helped me, in a sense, to get through what I went through, because I really understood that we are much more powerful. So when I'm back in the body, in the face of what was being done to me, I was powerless and helpless. But I knew that that wasn't really true, that who I really was eternal and, powerful. And so, I wasn't afraid. And to this day, I'm absolutely unafraid of death, because it's actually quite nice. Feels much better not in here. And this reality it's very devolved. So that's the other thing I understood as a child, that whatever had gone on here, consciousness was very, very low. And so other places have much higher frequency and level of consciousness, and it's not like it is here. And I would always be very struck with how violent and, dark it was here. And I knew that that wasn't necessary. So it's hard to put into words, but what really helped me about those experiences is I knew this is one expression of life, and we come into form and we learn and we have experiences, but that's not really, it's a sliver of who we are. And so that really helped me to cope with what was happening. So when I felt really despairing, It's going to sound weird, but it was almost helpful that I died so often because it kept me going. It kept like that feeling that, I was here for a mission, I was here for a purpose, and so is everybody else. And so that really helped me to carry on. I wouldn't necessarily be aware the moment that I died, but it was more like the physicality of it, the pain, it just stopped. And there was like a silence. So the energy on Earth, it was very chaotic. Like I can't explain it, but there's a noise. And so that noise, that sort of chaotic little thing would be gone. It would be quiet and I wouldn't feel pain. And then I could see my body. So I learned, I don't remember exactly when it became familiar enough that I thought, oh, okay, I'm out of the body. And then Jesus would always be there. So when I would really see him. So as a child, though, it's kind of in a child's mind, it's hard to explain, it became normal. I was in this way and then I was back in this way. I was able to leave and it ended when I was 18. So it was basically from birth to age 18. And because of the things I saw, I have seen, so conversely to Jesus and the light, I have seen rituals where demonic entities enter our realm and they are dark. So it's like a dark smokiness. And again, there's a form, but it's not like a solid form like we have. So I've seen both types of energy. And then these entities, they're often people invite them in and they inhabit people as well. So I had an understanding that a lot of I have to say, the people that do this are the people at the highest levels of power, wealth, and fame in the world. So the people that run the world, they get their power from doing these rituals, from raping and sacrificing children. And then they bring this dark power into them. But what I would see when I was with Jesus is that it's like they're parasites. So because they have chosen to cut off that connection and they bring in the darker entities. So I compare it to if God is the sun, then their God, Lucifer, is the moon, who has a light, but it's really the reflection of the sun's light. So I became very aware of how these beings, they get this worldly power. I mean, they do get it from inviting these demons in, but they're much more limited than we are. So that helped me as a child too, because I understood that inherently, I, as someone connected to the light, was a much higher powered soul than they were. But then when you come into this reality, I guess the game changes. So it can be very, very different. I tend to, I call them knowings. Sometimes I will see things. When I meet people, I see people as a big billboard. So everything's energy. And then we look material, but we're actually energy. And so I have this way that I can see people and read their billboards. So it'll have everything about who one is, your name, your color, your past lives, or like there's a feeling, there's a knowing. And I have some telepathic abilities. So it's not that you hear other people's thoughts, it's just a knowing. Like you just kind of talk to someone or see them, and then it's like, oh, okay. There's a deeper knowing because here we're so restricted that we actually use words like the vibration of our voice and we transmit and it goes to the other person. But I believe we're all actually telepathic, but that's kind of been dumbed down out of us. And we're taught and raised to believe, that we are the body and that everything is physical, but it's not. And so because paradoxically of the experiences I went through, that's more online for me, but everybody has that ability and can tap into it. And what prevents that is trauma. And everyone who incarnates here goes through some kind of trauma. It's kind of a continuum, right? So I might be on this end, but everybody goes through something. And so anything that we have in us that's traumatic, when something's too stressful, our psyche sort of to cope, it fragments off the events and puts them away. So in shamanism, they call it, that the soul shatters and it's soul retrieval, right? And so when we get all those, when we kind of put ourselves together, that's where those abilities can basically, we've always had them. It's just that we can't access them. And I healed myself back from all of that. And so I think that's healing is a revolutionary act. It's really the most profound thing that we can do. And we recover ourselves in a huge, huge way. So kind of there's many different forms of that. But for myself, I had to, all the pieces that I'd split off and forgotten, you kind of forget and you kind of know, but they would come back as child parts. So one part would just come back and all the emotions would be there and I would cry and sob or scream or shake or something. And I would just allow, it's almost like going back in time traveling and retrieving that version of myself that went through the trauma and bringing it into the present and putting, like, holding it in me and then releasing all that. And I would see kind of the events that would happen. And then bit by bit, it's like I got all of myself back and healed every part that I got back. And then eventually that changed who I was. And so, probably, obviously, I had a lot of fear for many years when I was younger. Like I was just always afraid inside. And now today, I have managed to overcome that. I don't have that anymore. So, it's also another component of that. We all have like physical hygiene, like we take a shower or brush our teeth, but we don't really have mental hygiene. So I developed this way that I would always observe what I was thinking and the choices that I was making. And as I began to do that, I would say, wait, why am I thinking that? Is that true? And so it's sort of like that noise I described earlier. There's a lot of programming that we go through in our lives, whether it's through education or the TV or social media or whatever. There's all these disempowering ideas about ourselves. So I would find those thoughts, and they are like, it's hard to explain, but when I was on the other side, something that was really clear is that every single thing that I thought vibrated because we're all energy. It affected the whole, right? So I became very careful with even what am I thinking. And obviously, I've had angry thoughts and, vengeful thoughts. And so, but I know how significant every single thought we have is. So I would draw a bubble of light around me. If I had thoughts that were not good, I would get them out of me. I would speak them, I would draw them, I would dance them, and until I worked it through, but I would do it in a sacred bubble so that that wouldn't affect anyone else. So that's another way that I would describe healing is just always watching yourself. And, the Native Americans say like there's a black wolf and a white wolf on either shoulder, and which one are you going to feed, right? And so we can spiral down because of our thoughts and feel things because our brain doesn't distinguish between what's out here, what's on a screen, or what's actually in our head. So I got really good at monitoring everything that I'm thinking. And, when sometimes if I needed help, I would call on Jesus. And I have guides. People talk about guides, and mine are all in the form of animals. So I have some different animal guides. one of them would appear, or a few of them would appear if I asked and if I needed that extra help. So we're not alone here, and if you ask, you shall receive. That's really true. So I would also ask for help and ask that this memory or this event be taken from me. And then, we live in a body. So the body is important because it's what carries our soul around. And so I began to take care of my body. So I exercise 5 days a week. I eat, real food, healthy, organic food. I've gotten to the point in my life, I don't have an alarm that wakes me up. I wake up on my own, so I get enough sleep. And every day I sit for a while to connect with that soul part of me, because we go through daily life and we can forget that. And every time I've forgotten to do that, life is a lot harder. And so that connecting, I feel like it's like, okay, soul, remind me, what is it, what's guide me, what's my next choice, what's my next path. So I find living with that connection to be much, much easier. So personally, I know religion can be very comforting for people, so I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I don't do religion. So for me, it's a spiritual thing. I was trafficked and saw all kinds of horrible things within the Vatican. So at a young age, I was very aware what they say to the public and what they do are two very, very different things. And when I was really maybe 5 or 6, quite young, I remember saying, wait a minute, why in communion are they eating the body and drinking the blood of Christ? Because I had seen the Satanists drink the blood of children. And I don't want to be too horrific here, but, in these parties that they do, cook them and eat them. So this is part of their religion. So I wondered, wait, why is this part of, this Catholic faith? And then I would always see Jesus in a specific way. So I also would wonder, why is the image of him portrayed that he's dead and tortured on a cross, right? Like that seemed to me like religion was actually mocking. So I never have felt comfortable with religion. I believe that this is my belief. And again, I don't want to offend anyone, but this is kind of, my own opinion. Religion is a man made creation. And while it can be helpful for some, it can also, I feel, separate us because we have a direct connection. And so it's sort of saying, like, oh, you have to go through this intermediary to get to God. And that's not true. So that's kind of my 2 cents about religion. I'm not and never will be religious, but there is a creator, God. And, Jesus is from a frequency, so he's the Christ, and it's crystalline energy. So there's many other beings that can achieve that energetic level. And so I believe he probably did come here as a human, like many of us have come here, and he came here and he was a very evolved being. And so he tried to teach people, some of the things I've read that he wrote, he said, look within, so they made a church and they make you look without. But I think that's not exactly entirely correct. Anyway, that's my opinion. So the New Age is a program. It's quite satanic. I know a lot about the Satanists. So, and they have this idea that, oh, just don't look at evil, don't pay attention, everything is great, and you'll just rise to these higher, like you'll go to these other dimensions. But in fact, they're not a location, they're an internal state. And so if you imagine that all the things that we go through in our life get like put on us, like, like if you're in some kind of a clay pot, like all this stuff dries up and you just become sort of hardened. If you chip off all that trauma and all those distorted beliefs and everything that's incorrect, you automatically get to that higher frequency. So actually, this David Hawkins has a pretty interesting chart, and people can go look it up online. And he lists all the emotions as different frequency bands. And so some of them that are survival frequencies are like, grief and or despair and hatred and anger and guilt and shame. And then you can go up the scale, and at the very tippy top is love and peace. So we can get to those frequencies, number one, by doing our inner work and healing ourselves, but also by what we focus on. So when I felt that in a certain day, I feel like, oh, I'm kind of in a low, how do I know I'm in a low frequency? Because I don't feel good. I feel, I'm having negative thoughts. I don't feel good. So sometimes I will actively do something to bump myself up. And that could be like going for a walk in the woods, just being in nature. Sometimes I will hug a tree and feel their frequency. I have pets, so playing with my pets or sitting very still and quiet and remembering I list everything that I'm grateful for. I have house, I have food, I have water. It's a beautiful day. I have love in my life. So those kinds of thoughts, you can think your way into a higher frequency. And you can go do things because the body is also important. So you can go do things that are, soothing, like even get in a bathtub with some Epsom salts, like the water can be very soothing. So we always have a choice what frequency we're in. And there were things that were the same, but no, it wasn't the same every time. And sometimes I would be given an ability that I could bring back. Of all the things that were done to me, all my bones were broken and I was burned and, raped and all these things. I brought back this, I think we actually all have it, this self-healing ability. So I could heal my body very, very quickly after all of the abuses. And I don't really exactly know how I did it, but that's something. So on one of the near-death experiences, I brought back this ability to heal myself because I had to survive. I knew that I was going to survive and make it out. And then when I was grown up, expose these things that are done to children so that, they still do these things to children today and it needs to stop. I think people are getting a little more familiar. There was a movie recently that came out, Sound of Freedom, and it showed child trafficking. It didn't show a lot of the fact that this is done by the very tippy top of society, but it's something. So I brought back this ability to heal my body, and sometimes I would bring back other abilities that would help me basically to make it and to survive. So it would be different in different moments. In the big picture, everything is one. And if you call it God, or you can call it whatever name you want, that just beingness and everything is okay. Everything is perfect. But to have different experiences, there's different worlds and realities created. So if it's like stepping down from that oneness. So you step down and you step down, you step down, and there's different, like here on this planet, there's different ways that we come into form and experience ourselves and experience all kinds of things. So one thing I would want to say is we're really all souls. And even higher than that, we're really only one being, so we at some point we merge back with that oneness. And so just to remember that in our lifetimes, that because we forget, and Earth particularly, you have a memory wipe, so it's like extra hard when you decide to come here. But I think in our life journey, it's important to try and remember all of who we are, because we are eternal souls and we're here having an experience. And so what matters most is our morality, our integrity, like really making a choice from a place of love. And one of the gifts that I came back with from these experiences is just a bigger picture. Like I don't get lost in my own narrow little life. Like I look at the whole world and what's going on for everyone. And we're all connected. So, if God is an ocean, we're all a drop. And even us all here on this planet, it's all like we're all one cell in a bigger body, right? So we all are interdependent and interconnected. And everything that we choose to think or do in our lives affects us, but also everyone else. So it has made me really aware of my thoughts, my actions, and a sense of why I'm here. So I think all of us decided to come to this planet. And I think it's important to try and remember why. What was my mission? What did I come here to do? Now, having said that, just existing and being a good person and being in love as in high frequency as much as you can is like a bunch of light bulbs turned on all over the planet. And when enough of us turn on, then the darkness just, if you light a match in a dark room, there's no dark. So the way out of the situation here on Earth, which is kind of negative, and I don't think anyone can deny that today with everything that's going on, is to start with yourself and turn on your light. Because if all of us do that, then the frequency of the whole planet shifts and goes to a higher level. And from the near-death experiences that I had, on some levels, when we live on higher levels, we eat light. There isn't suffering. It's very different. And so we can get there. And I think maybe that's what's going on here on this planet is it kind of tilted to the dark, but we're tilting it back. And as we heal ourselves and raise our frequency, it ripples out and it lifts everyone up, including the planet herself. So when people talk about ascending, I think that is a real thing, but all of us in this reality go together, right? So what each of us do is super, super important. So I would just say, do your best to love as much, heal, help other people, use that creativity we have. We're like mini creators. Bring something into this reality that's going to improve it. That would kind of be my message.